Okay, everyone. So welcome to Live Wednesdays. And I am your host, Theresa Simon, and we are here with Nikki Davis. Nikki Davis is a board member, and I am the executive director and founder of Narcissistic Domestic Violence Healing and Support Incorporated, for short, NDV Healing and Support Incorporated. So Live Wednesdays are something that we go live every Wednesday in October. We only do this during the month of October for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I had someone ask us that question. We only do the Live Wednesdays during the Domestic Violence Awareness Month. However, we do the support group that runs continuously throughout the year on Saturdays. Our support group has a separate name. It's not called Live Wednesdays. Our support group is called our Domestic Violence Support Empowerment Series. Those run Saturdays throughout the year, 5:30 p.m. Central Time, 6:30 Eastern Time. And you join those by sending us an email to domesticviolencehealing@outlook.com, and then we will give you the Zoom link for that. So that's something separate. Another thing that this is also being uploaded to our podcast, the NDV Healing and Support podcast, as one of the episodes in season 2. However, we will have additional episodes being uploaded as well throughout, and that's something that's ongoing as well as our podcast. Different episodes get uploaded every week. The other thing we wanted to touch on before we get started as well is a lot of people, I'm just touching on some of the things that people had questions on just so that we clarify those things before we start. Another thing that we are doing for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so NDV is doing a couple things. We didn't want to have too many events, but we do have some events. So we have the Live Wednesdays. That's one event that we're doing for the Domestic Violence Awareness Month. The second event that we are doing is the second annual virtual Speak Out, Silence Hides Violence. That is a Speak Out and discussion panel. We had the first one last year and it went really well. And so we're doing the second annual, and that will be Thursday, October 28th at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And that will be live from the Narcissistic Domestic Violence Healing and Support Facebook page. And you can join us as our live audience for that. And what that is a virtual speak out from survivors as well as domestic violence professionals, mental health advocates, authors, nonprofit organizational executives. And so that is our second event. And then we also will be having, like I said, the podcast episode. So those are the events that we are having for narcissistic healing, domestic violence healing and support through the October Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And then finally, last but not least, I've been getting questions about my book. Again, for those of you who don't know me, again, if you're just joining us, I am Theresa Simon, Executive Director and founder of NDV Healing and Support Incorporated, as well as the host for the NDV Healing podcast. So my book, My Secret Life, My Journey Through Domestic Violence, that is available now. You can still purchase that for $20. The link is on my page, on the NDV Healing page, as well as the Theresa Simon Domestic Violence and Narcissistic Abuse Advocate and Recovery page. You can check that out, and you can go ahead and click the link to purchase the book for $20. And in the book, there are I do give some teaching moments as well as tell a little bit about my story. So now we can get started with our topic tonight. Part of the Live Wednesdays that we do every October for domestic violence awareness, they are called Live Wednesdays Domestic Violence Awareness and Narcissist Abuse 101. The reason why they're called that is because we give, each Wednesday that we go live, we give different informational, educational topics on domestic violence and narcissist abuse. We have a little technical difficulties today, so we're not actually live. This is a pre-recording, but the following Wednesdays and for the other event, we will be live actually. It's just today there was a little bit of a difficulty. So also, Nikki is not only our board member, but she is also the founder of Survivors Overcoming Abusive Partners, which they will be having a rally this month for October Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So please make sure you are checking out their page as well on Facebook so that you can be a part of the rally. So now we're going to get started on our educational topics, the reason why you guys all joined us tonight. So I'm going to just dive right into our topics. So first and foremost, I'm going to talk a little bit about domestic violence. And I am going to give you, just for those of us who are just joining us, give a little background definition of things. So domestic violence is violent or aggressive behavior within the home, typically involving the violent abuse of a spouse, a partner, or intimate relationship. Domestic violence includes physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, economic or financial abuse, spiritual abuse, and narcissist abuse. Narcissist abuse is domestic violence. Statistically, 1 in 3 women will experience domestic violence, and 1 in 6 women that are abused first during pregnancy. Now, narcissist abuse, I want to touch on that as well. Because we just covered what domestic violence is. So now I want to go over what narcissist abuse entails. So narcissist abuse is a term for the psychological, financial, sexual, and physical abuse of others by someone with narcissistic traits. At least 5 out of the 9 traits, and they suffer from narcissistic personality disorder and NPD. So the 5 of the 9 traits would be grandiose sense of self-importance, preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, ideal love, etc. Belief that they are special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions. They have a need for excessive admiration, sense of entitlement, interpersonality, exploitive behavior, lack of empathy, envy of others or belief that others are envious of them, and demonstration of arrogant or haughty behaviors or attitudes. And some of the terminology when dealing with narcissist abuse are, some of the terms are love bombing, flying monkeys, hoovering, gaslighting, projecting, chaos bombing, love bombing, triangulation, scapegoat, golden child, mirroring, and other terms. So, and again, I'm just reiterating, narcissist abuse is domestic violence. Now, much like the domestic violence has its own will, and then the narcissist abuse has its own will as well. And what the narcissist is, because a lot of times the abuser, it may be a narcissist, not always, but may be a narcissist, a lot of the cases. So they're operating off of 2 wills. So I will go over the power and abuse will for domestic violence and then the narcissist abuse will. Now, the power will and control will for domestic violence, it actually has a physical component, the sexual component as well, and then it discusses how there's a honeymoon phase, and then there a tension building phase, and then it escalates to the abuse and the violence phase. With the narcissistic wheel, there's the idealization phase where trauma bonding and love bombing take place, and then the devaluation phase, and then the discard phase. And then a lot of times they will hoover the victim to come back to them, much like, in the honeymooning phase of the domestic violence wheel, and then it starts back over, just like the wheel. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let Nikki jump in here with some things that she may want to add as well.
Thank you, Theresa. I think that it's really good that we do this every year so that we come back to the basis, because a lot of times I feel as though, even with my situation, when I was going through all of the court stuff, and I was like, I feel like I'm like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like I'm giving him fuel, or, you know what I'm saying? Because you're trying to be there for the child. And that's one thing with my situation, because going through a custody battle with your former abuser, and you're trying to advocate for your child and get all that out, but it's like you're giving them fuel, or they get excited that they're getting a rise out of you, even though it has nothing to do with them per se. So I think it's always good that we do come back to the foundations and remind ourselves, don't give them any fuel, even if it is pertaining to like the gray rock method, just trying to just basically have control over your own emotions and don't react to things that they do to pull that out of you, because of essentially they're trying to make you look crazy and you're playing into their little game. And if you just don't buy into it, it's, you don't get those reactions out of them, and they don't make you look crazy as well. But also just really just identifying with myself, like when I was having PTSD moments, what it was that I was going through, because that's the first thing. Whenever you're having like any kind of PTSD or anxiety, you have to regulate yourself. You have to, okay, what am I feeling right now? To help manage your anxiety. So I think that always coming back to the bases once a year, where we can do this for new people who are just coming, but also to remind all of us who have been survivors of abuse how far we've come, how we're in a better state than we were before. Even if it doesn't feel like you're in a better place, you really are. Because I can think of times where I would have reacted one completely different way to my abuser. And now I'm just kind of like, okay, it is what it is. So, and I've become more acceptant of my situation and everything, because my son doesn't stay with me. So, it takes a lot for you to have to go through that and still manage your day-to-day life, raise your children. And, I think that it's important that we do get back to the basis. And I told you I wanted to do this today. I wanted to get on here and talk about R. Kelly, though, because he is really in the news.
Yes, we're going to have a podcast episode about that.
You think so?
Yeah, I think we definitely should do that.
I think it's such a controversial situation. So I've always, because a lot of people have different views on it. So, but absolutely, I think that we would have enough material on that to just do an episode by itself on that. I just had to mention it.
Okay, and so then for trauma bonding, so we're gonna get into that.
Okay.
This so trauma bonding, because a lot of people may or may not know what that is, and there are some people that, but I want to give an overview for those who don't. Trauma bonding is a type of toxic bond that occurs when the abuser alternates between creating highs and lows within the relationship, alternating between being nice and mean, so to speak, and offers reward or punishment as they deem fit. Thus, the cycles of abuse are followed by intermittent love or reward, and the abuser will train the victim that happiness is solely dependent on how well the victim can please the abuser. The trauma bond can long outlive the relationship, leaving the victim craving comfort from the very person who hurt them, the abuser. The trauma bond is an addiction, just like alcoholism or drugs or gambling, that can be difficult to break. Trauma bonds occur or form sometimes because of childhood or unresolved past trauma, not always. Because of its addicted nature, though, it can be difficult to break free on your own, but not impossible. But therapy and coaching really helps those who are experiencing a trauma bond. Therapy is extremely important for the recovering from the trauma bond. And one of the things also about the trauma bond is going back to what I was talking about, that it is an addiction. It is an addiction just like alcohol, drugs, gambling, or any other addiction. You will go through withdrawals, just like an alcoholic goes through withdrawals from alcohol, and a drug user goes through withdrawals with drugs. Because just like an addiction, there are chemicals working at this time. So there are the dopamine, the serotonin, and the oxytocin. So the oxytocin that is released when a woman has a baby, and it creates that as a woman is breastfeeding and nurturing that baby, it creates a bond with that baby. Well, that same chemical is also released when you are bonding with that narcissist or that abuser, as well as the dopamine and the serotonin. The feel-good chemicals are also being released as this abuser is love bombing you and mirroring you and creating this trauma bond with you. Also, that you get addicted, and that's usually during the idealization phase. For those of you who are, that have just joined us when I was going over the narcissist wheel, the idealization, the devaluation, and the discard phase. So that's when that takes place. So
I think I was just going to say really quick, Theresa, and I think it's important for people to understand that they are mirroring back basically your personality to you. And that's why you're falling in love with them. And that isn't actually who they actually are as a person. You think that you found this person that you love, and you know what I'm saying? Oh my gosh, no one has ever loved me like this. Well, they're basically mirroring back your personality to you, which is why you are so connected to them. So that's not even really who they are.
No, it's not. You bring up the great point, and that is one of the narcissist terminologies that we were just talking about, mirroring. So they literally, it's exactly what the terminology sounds exactly like what it is. They are literally mirroring yourself back to you. So essentially, you are falling in love with yourself. All the things and all the goals and the dreams and the aspirations and all the things that you love, they mirror right back to you. For example, you want to have 4 kids. They want to have 4 kids. You want to be a doctor. They're interested in the medical field. They want to be a doctor. They're literally mirroring your personality right back to you. And if you saw them in a previous relationship, if you had known them before, you would have seen them mirroring their exes, because they mirror each different person that they're with. So their personality is not unique to them. They, like it should be with the average person. With the narcissist, they are literally mirroring each person that they're with so that they can get that person attached to them. So that is, Nikki just brought in our basically what our definition of mirroring is for one of the narcissistic terms. Another term that I mentioned when I was talking about the trauma bond and how the abuser gets you addicted to them is love bombing. So love bombing, what that is love bombing is an attempt to influence a person by demonstrations of attention and affection. So it's when you are showered with nonstop calls, gifts, compliments, attentions, stopping by your house. This begins at the beginning of the cycle of abuse, where the abuser will withhold that love and affection and attention to manipulate you. And it's part of that trauma bond, because remember I said it's creating that high and that low so that you get it addicted. So that's a part of that. And you feel this confidence boost, and you feel so wanted and so appreciated by someone. This also goes into that dopamine and that serotonin that I was explaining.
I was just going to say that.
Those feel-good chemicals that are being released, well, that's what that's also creating, because they're saying you are the best thing in the world. You are the best thing that's ever happened to me. You are my soulmate. I love you. I love you. I love you. I want to move in with you. I want to have kids with you. I want to get married. This is all a part of that. So, and a lot of times they're very strategic about that. You may not have known, but the abuser may have been watching you for months, even years, studying you, seeing what type of things you like, what type of things make you upset, what the biggest thing they study, what are your weaknesses? What are the things that in your past that may have happened that really hurt you? So they can use all of this information not only to mirror you and make sure that they make themselves the perfect person that you want, but also that they could use these things against you, your weaknesses against you later when you are in the thick of the abuse and you feel trapped. They want to use all the weaknesses against you. For example, well, your family doesn't really care about you. Your family doesn't really love you. I'm the only person you have. Or you can't make it out on your own. You can't get a job. I'm the only person that can financially support you. You won't make it out there on your own. So they will use these types of things so that they can make you feel like you are good and trapped and you can't go anywhere or leave this relationship. And Nikki, go ahead, jump in.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and just like I was just going to say the same thing when you were discussing the love bombing. That is when you're having those oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin being released in your brain, and you feel good. It's not just about just boosting or them saying love you, but you physically feel better. And so, like you said, they withhold that when they're angry with you or when you're in the abuse so that you feel even worse. It's not sometimes, and that's how sometimes even emotional abuse can be just as bad as physical abuse, because they're internally hurting you. It's not just a physical component. And a lot of times, if there is a physical component there, the emotional part was already there, because you don't even have the ability to say, well, this is wrong. I'm going to walk away from this. You take it because you feel like it's you. You're doing it. What happened to the person that they were before? What was it I did that made them be this person before, that showered me with all this love and made me feel so good? And you keep trying to get back to, it's like you said, if alcohol and gambling, you're chasing that first high continuously. Yep. And it's just an up and a down, and it's a roller coaster. You're constantly trying to get that first high back, but you never do. And it just gets worse. So absolutely. I was just going to elaborate on that some more. I was like, you taking the words right out my mouth, girl.
Great minds think alike. But yes, I have to completely agree with you, because one of the things I have to say, as a domestic violence and narcissist abuse advocate and coach, one of the things I do in the empowerment sessions, we talk about a lot of different subjects, but for those of you who watch me on YouTube or listen to me on the podcast, you will know that I do bring up trauma bonding a lot in our sessions, not just because it is something that people are not aware of. That's one piece of it. Another piece of it is those that are aware of it, some people don't fully understand how much of an addiction it is. They see that alcohol is an addiction. They see that gambling and drug use is addiction, but they don't understand that the trauma bond is an addiction just like that, and that you do go through withdrawal. The other thing is there are, for alcoholics, there's Alcoholic Anonymous. For drug users, there's support groups for them. For gambling, the list goes on, but there aren't as many specific support groups for people who are experiencing a trauma bond. So that is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about trauma bonding and talking about it, and being an advocate and an empowerment coach, because it is something, as someone who has experienced it, it was one of the worst things that I experienced. Going through that withdrawal, it was terrible. So I want to let other people know as much as possible, because so many times I come across, like when people message me or they reach out to me, they think that they're alone in this trauma bond. And I want to be able to reach people and let them know that this is something that you're not alone in, and there are support groups out there for that. And I created a specific support group for that, so that people do not feel like they're going through this alone.
Well, and also, for a long time, domestic violence was something that was like taboo in society. Like, you weren't supposed to talk about it. You know what I mean? Or especially in a lot of African American communities. Like, no, you don't lock the man away from their children. You know what I'm saying? It's this whole taboo thing.
You don't call
So
the police.
yeah, and so no one was talking about it. And then we're like reaching out to each other, like, well, wait a minute, there's a lot of people who are going through this. And that the best way to get through it is to talk through it with each other. Because at the end of the day, that's all. When you're going to therapy or in support groups, we're all just sharing about our personal experiences and things that we're going through. And that's how we're working through it and getting through it in a healthy manner, instead of us continuously just going back to the same cycle and not getting any help, not saying anything. And then unfortunately, women, children, they end up dead because of that, because it gets to the point where the violence escalates so badly. And because they've allowed it to escalate so badly, they think they can always come back from it. And then abusers end up taking it too far.
Exactly. And the thing, you touch on an important thing. It's so important. The other reason why I do this as a domestic violence advocate and narcissistic abuse advocate is that people need to know that there are support groups, there's therapy, and a lot of the people that I assist, they are doing those things together. They're going to therapy, they're doing support groups, they're receiving coaching. And so there's a lot of support out there for you. I don't ever want anyone to think that they're going through this alone. There's a ton of support out there for you. And even if you just want to sit in, we've had lots of people just, come in and say, you know what, I'm not really ready to talk during the group session, but I would like to sit in and listen. That's perfectly fine, just to come in and sit in and listen. We understand that everyone is different in their journey. They may not be at the point where they're ready to leave just yet, but we're there to support you in whatever part of the journey that you are in. We will meet you where you are. And that is the whole point of, helping someone.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. Because like I said, I mean, you're not alone in this journey. And that's part of the reason why I really started to tell my story, because I was like, there are other women out there like me who are afraid to speak up, and maybe I can say something that can reach them, and if they see my courage, then they'll want to be free from that as well. Because I always say this, I'm like, it's like when you get out of an abusive relationship, it's like the grass is greener. I don't know what it is. And just learning how to naturally release your own serotonin, to naturally make yourself happy. And some things that work for others don't work for, like, I enjoy walking and I enjoy jogging. And that was something that you were like, that's not really doing it for me, but I was like, okay, well, you got to branch out and figure out what's going to help you release. So when I get upset, I'm like, I'm just going to go for a run and I'm, just get this out of my system. And that's how I naturally release it. Just finding things that make you happy, learning to love yourself again. And someone else doesn't have to be the person that, that has you, that makes you happy, because it shouldn't be that way. You should be able to make yourself happy. And rediscovering that and just figuring out who I am as a woman, that I would have never changed that for the world.
And can you talk a little bit about your experience, just a little bit?
Yeah, well, and initially, because I left my son's father back in early 2015. So it's about to come up on 7 years now. Wow. So yeah, I know. And what made me really want to start telling my story and reach out was when I had gotten a DUI. And so he used that opportunity to file for custody of my son, because I had previous DUIs in the past. So he was manipulating the courts to like, oh, she's an unfit mom because she's got this DUI. And I started having nightmares again. I started having PTSD symptoms again. And I couldn't figure out, I was like, how is it that I've been free from this man for so long, but I'm I'm screaming in my sleep, or I was biting my kid's father in my sleep, because I just was so like, because I was freaked out, because it was like he had dug up all that stuff, because I never really actually dealt with it. I kind of just shoved it to the back of my mind and just didn't deal with it. So it forced me to actually have to deal with it. And that's when I realized that it's not just me going through stuff like that. There's lots of other women who are going through things like that. I started looking up narcissistic abusers who take their victims to court and take custody of their children so that they can still have control over their life. And that is an actual thing. And that's when I was like, it's because we don't speak up. It's because we're not saying anything about it. So of course they're going to continue to be able to take advantage of us this way. So it made me want to speak. And, now, I mean, I go on job interviews and I'll be like, I'm a domestic violence survivor. I have no problem. I'm not ashamed of it. I think that it's made me a stronger person. So, I think that that's, if we let them take our voice away, it's just succumbing to them.
Absolutely. And one of the things, well, you touched on a couple things. I want to go back. You said, that it is important to love yourself, is what you were talking about. And I think, yes, that is definitely important. You also talked about like things that you can do. And I want to talk, activities that you can do to release the feel good chemicals, instead of, getting that from the abuser, when they're love bombing you and whatnot.
Right.
Because you want to release that dopamine and that serotonin on your own by doing
naturally
activities. So that kind of coincides with some of the things that I wanted to talk about that you can do to help with your trauma bond. I'll use myself as an example. So for me, one of the reasons why I became trauma bonded to my ex, it was, two big reasons. Number one, there was a trauma bond with one of my parents. As I stated when I was going over the trauma bond definition, it can occur in childhood. Not always, but it can. So I was trauma bonded with my father. There was an inconsistent relationship and a trauma bond with the highs and lows, where he was nice to me and not so nice to me, just much like with my ex, my abuser. So that was one reason why I had a trauma bond with my ex. The second reason why was also in childhood. I was not really shown how to self-soothe. I was self-soothe. I was pretty much self-soothing alone, and finding, how to deal with things on my own and self-soothing myself, kind of, but not doing a really good job of it, kind of, and not really knowing how to navigate that. So then I became an adult who had issues with self-soothing. And then I met my ex, and he, like I said, what narcissists do, they figure out your weaknesses, and he figured out that was a weakness for me. So then he portrayed himself as this person that was always going to help self-soothe me. And if you're having a bad day, just come to me and you could talk to me and all those things. And then, of course, that's where the trauma bond came into play, to where I would have a bad day. And much like an alcoholic who's really struggling and having a stressful bad day or a stressful week, they want to turn to the alcohol, or the drug user wants to turn to the drug of choice. And the gambler, starts gambling, or the person who's addicted to food may pick up food. In this case, I would go to him. So some things that you can do, like Nikki, she did point out, walking, journaling is also some things, exercising. There's a lot of different things, but there are some other things too, in addition to journaling, walking, and exercising. So make a commitment to live in reality. A lot of times when we're in the midst of the trauma bonding, you find yourself unintentionally, fantasizing about what you could have hoped the relationship would be, what you thought the relationship was going to be. So you have to make a commitment that you're going to live in the reality, live in the real time of what is happening right now. Not holding on to what could have been, what may be with the relationship, what is happening right now, here in the moment. How is the person treating you right now? One of the biggest things you do is, live and take it one day at a time. This is with any addiction, alcohol, drugs, gambling. It's the same thing with the trauma bond. You are going to go through a withdrawal, just like the other addictions with alcohol, drug abuse, and gambling. But you make a decision, just like alcoholics, and they have like a 12-step program and things like that. You live one day at a time. Don't try not to get into that all or nothing thinking. I can't ever do this or that again. Right now, focus on one day at a time. Hey, I've gone 3 hours without talking to my abuser. I've gone one day without talking to my abuser. Focus on one day at a time. And also, focus on your self-care and supporting your self-care. So that goes back to what Nikki was talking about: journaling, painting, walking, exercising. Like Nikki said, I found out that the walks really weren't my thing, but I'm worked on trying different things to see what would work for me. Taking a hot bath, it's whatever may work for you.
And that was something, just to point out, that I had gotten from going to AA for the alcohol, because when I used to work at United Healthcare, they had a gym in the basement. So I would go to work early and I would work out before I would go to my desk to work. And I found that I was extremely more productive and I was in a much better mood than when I just rolled out of bed and went to work. So that's how I kind of stumbled on that accidentally. And like I said, for everyone, it's different, but I didn't realize that working out put me in that. It was giving me that the dopamine rush. And that's when I found out at AA, the facilitator was like, that's an actual thing. When you work out, your body naturally releases dopamine. And I was like, oh, well, then that makes sense. But not everybody's the same. But yeah, but it's all about finding what works for you. Like you said, it could be hot bath, journaling. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be that. Yeah, that's something I used to do in high school. And it kind of ties back to when I was saying getting to rediscover myself, because over time and being in those, because I was in 2 abusive relationships. So being in those abusive relationships and constantly catering to somebody else, I had lost myself. So I realized, I used to get up at the crack of dawn and I used to jog before I used to go to school and stuff. Maybe I should get back into those things, because those things obviously produce positive results to me chemically,
Absolutely. And it's like you said, I myself have been in 2 abusive relationships as well. And it's about learning to love yourself, but it's also about learning to rediscover yourself. Who are you really? Because a lot of times when you are in an abusive relationship, you lose your sense of self and who you are.
Yes.
And who you are without that person, weighing you down. So yes,
exactly.
Definitely.
Because you find yourself just naturally cooking the foods that they like, watching the stuff that they like, because you want to please them, because you want them to keep love bombing you. So in sense, it's like you're erasing your own identity.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And the more you stay, the more yourself gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you don't recognize the person looking back at you in the mirror.
Exactly.
And so that touches on, just finding that self-care, making sure that you will have relapses, because again, this is an addiction. But just like when an alcoholic has a relapse, they seek out their AA meetings, they seek out a sponsor, and you can do the same. That's why our support group is on Saturdays. It's open for people so that you can come and receive the support that you need. There's going to be relapses, you're going to go through withdrawal, but keep doing that self-care, keep going to therapy, keep having support groups, and you will get through it. Also, make sure you're feeling your emotions. Don't try to cut your emotions out. That's not a good thing. Make sure you feel what you're feeling. Whenever you're away from the abuser or the toxic person, you may feel tempted to reach out to them for reassurance, especially, you know, with that trauma bond and you being addicted to them, but consider writing your feelings down instead. Journaling may help with that, or talking to your therapist or your support group. Make sure that you grieve. An unpopular opinion, there is still grief, even with losing, you know, a toxic and dysfunctional relationship. There's still grief, grief of, you know, letting go of what you thought the relationship could be, or, you know, so there's still letting go of a toxic relationship and breaking a trauma bond is pretty much one of the hardest things you may ever have to do. So still, it's difficult to do that without acknowledging that there is some grief in that process.
Well, it's not to say that your feelings weren't real. You know what I mean? Just because the relationship was dysfunctional doesn't mean that you didn't care about them. So it's okay to grieve them.
Exactly.
And that's a thing, because, you know, if you think about Stockholm syndrome, you know, and people who were kidnapped by people and could have escaped but didn't, and end up missing their kidnappers, because that is the whole thing.
Exactly. And then finally, the last step with in terms of dealing with the trauma bond, start to rebuild your life, which is what Nikki just touched on a little bit. You know, start getting back to loving yourself, focusing on the things that make you happy, focusing on your goals, going back to school if that's what you wanted to do, getting your degree, or, you know, taking that new job that you wanted to do, or those new hobbies that you wanted to do. You know, if you were into baking or painting or knitting, whatever it is, you know, to rebuild your life little by little. Start rebuilding your life and thinking about your future, for yourself, and, you know, if you have those, and what that looks like for you. You know, like I said, starting a hobby, going back to school, going to church, joining clubs.
Oh yeah, church is a really good one too.
Exactly. Just making choices for yourself that make you happy and that take you away from the toxic interactions that you had with that abuser that was destroying your sense of self and destroying your sense of mind, your peace of mind. And
Absolutely.
then, yeah. So anything else you wanted to add, Nikki, before I go on to another piece?
No, just, you know, like you said, learning to rediscover yourself, loving yourself, knowing that yourself is enough. You know, I think that's the really key. That's the key. And I think a lot of it was my children as well, because I know that they depend on me. So that's what really got me out the bed and got me to work, because, you know, I had to pay the bills. But I mean, just keep this, I just had to keep telling myself that I was enough. And that, you know what I'm saying? Like, even the things, I'm not saying that everything I did in the relationship was 100% right, but I didn't deserve to be treated that way.
Absolutely. No one deserves to be treated that way. Absolutely. And then, so we did talk about trauma bonding a lot. So I'm going to wrap that up. Okay. And I just want to get into, make sure. Okay. So there are 7 stages of trauma bonding. We kind of just pretty much went over all of that with the trauma bonding. There's love bombing, trust and dependency, criticism, gaslighting, and then resigning to control, and then loss of self, and then of course the addiction, the trauma bond, where you're addicted to the abuser. So we've pretty much covered all of that. And so now I want to move on to talk a little bit about strangulation. Now, strangulation is something that many victims have experienced in domestic violence. But what many may not know is strangulation is a huge red flag, because strangulation is a huge indicator of homicide in domestic violence situations. So it's very important to talk about that. And so there is an article that discusses that. Sandra Ziebold is an executive director of the Beacon of Hope Crisis Center in Indianapolis in the United States. And she's actually dealt with victims of strangulation. And she's stated that she has seen an increase in victims who have been victims of strangulation. Since 2021, the Beacon of Hope Crisis Center has served 1,073 victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and more than 200 of those victims reported strangulation and had neck and head trauma due to domestic violence. It is an extreme problem that is getting much worse. So non-fatal strangulation has been reported in nearly 45% of attempted homicides in domestic violence situations against women. And 97%, listen to the statistic, I'll reiterate it, 97% of victims are strangled manually. And I'm here to tell you that I am one of those statistics. And so, now that I'm obviously out of the abusive relationship that I was in, the 2 abusive relationships that I was in, knowing, the knowledge that I have now that strangulation is a huge indicator of homicide, it makes me think of how close I could have been to not being here. So it's very important, to get that message out there, because once it's at that point, you're really nearing the end.
Absolutely. It only takes, I think, like 7 minutes to strangle somebody to death. And when they're in that rage, because I've definitely was strangled by both of my abusers. So it's you don't really understand. And then there's not really many laws that protect you, because if someone is strangling you and you grab something next to you and you hit them, you're going to jail. That's another thing that I don't think people think about as well. Not only could they kill you, but you could potentially go to jail if you're just trying to live.
Right, depending on where you are, the laws vary, but yes.
Well, I know Maryland, you're going to jail if you're in Maryland, because at that point they have a weapon. You have a weapon and they don't, even though they were strangling you and could have killed you with their bare hands. That's how Maryland is, which is why I'm leaving. But but yeah, so yeah, depending on where you live. But it's just not, it's not something that you should overlook that's happening in your relationship. It's a very serious thing.
Absolutely. And okay, so there's a couple other things I just wanted to make sure I touch on too. So there are some other things with domestic violence that I wanted to make sure I touch on before we wrap up here too. Coercion and threats are a part of domestic violence. Coercion and threats are when they are making and carrying out threats to do something to hurt the victim, threatening to leave the victim, commit suicide, reporting them to social services, the victim to social services, making or trying to make the victim drop legal charges against them, making the victim do illegal things or illegal acts. Intimidation. This is a huge one because a lot of things, just like we touched on the strangulation being a huge red flag and an indicator of homicide, intimidation is a huge one because a lot of people don't view this as domestic violence, but intimidation is, and emotional abuse is. And there's actually a really good mini series out on domestic violence. It's called The Maid, and it's actually on Netflix, and that really shows the intimidation and the emotional abuse. So it's really, if you have time and it's not too triggering for you, I would, suggest you watch that, because that really gives a really good illustration on emotional abuse and intimidation. And emotional abuse and intimidation and coercion and threats, they all are domestic violence. So intimidation is making the victim afraid by using looks, actions, and gestures, throwing things at the wall, breaking windows, smashing things, destroying property, abusing pets, displaying weapons, showing you that that they have the weapon on them, the gun on them, the knife on them, things like that. Emotional abuse, putting the victim down, making the victim feel bad about themselves, calling the victim names, making the victim think that the victim is going crazy or losing their mind, playing mind games, humiliating the victim, making the victim feel guilty. And then finally, isolation, controlling what the victim does, who the victim talks to, when the victim can have their phone, taking the phone away from the victim, their car keys, purse, things like that, reading or going through the phone, determining or trying to stop the victim from going, where they're going or to their job, keeping the victim up so that the victim can't go to sleep, so that they can't go to the job, limiting outside involvement or keeping them away from their family, friends, and using jealousy to justify those actions. So those are all domestic violence. Again, it's physical, emotional, financial abuse. And another statistic, more than 94% of domestic violence survivors have had some form of financial abuse. And it can take anywhere from 2 to 3 years to recover from that financial abuse as well. So again, domestic violence encompasses all of that. So I just wanted to get those things out there because there are people that don't know or may not understand what all of that is. And then of course, reiterating again that narcissist abuse is domestic violence. Nikki, anything that you wanted to add as well?
No, just one thing. One more thing I was just going to say. I didn't even realize I was being financially abused, until we started talking about, and I was telling you about when he strangled me because I wouldn't give him some of my tax money. And you were like, that's financial abuse. Like, I knew that was regular abuse. But yeah, he's like, oh, that's my kid. I deserve tax money too. And, I was like, when have you ever bought him a sock? And then I ended up getting strangled. So, sometimes you don't even realize, that it is as bad as it, until you really break down situations or have an outside person tell you, well, wait, that's financial abuse too. Like, it's crazy because I knew that he was physically and emotionally abusive, but I didn't even think about that. I didn't even realize that till years after the relationship ended. So Absolutely. It's very easy to get caught up and not realize it's happening to you.
Yes, and let's talk about financial abuse. So financial abuse can be preventing the victim from getting or keeping a job. Like I went back to when I was talking about keeping the victim up at night so that they won't be able to go into work and function. Making the victim ask the abuser for money, giving the victim an allowance, and only saying that this is the amount of money that they can have or use. Now this is a huge one, taking the victim's money. So that can be where the victim is working a full-time job and she has zero of her paycheck, or the majority of her paycheck is going to the abuser. That is financial abuse. Not letting the victim know about or have access to the family income, don't know any of the bank account numbers or where the bank is even located at. Those are all examples of financial abuse. And then another part of abuse, minimizing, denying, and blaming, making light of the abuse and the abuser's actions, not taking the victim's concerns about it seriously, making the victim think that the victim is crazy, saying the abuse didn't happen or that specific incident never happened. You're remembering it wrong. Shifting responsibility for the abusive behavior and saying that the victim caused the behavior.
Yep. Gaslighting at its finest.
Yes. And yes, that is true, Nikki. It takes us right into another narcissist abuse term, gaslighting, where they make you believe that the abuser is trying to attempt to make the victim believe that is not reality, that did not happen.
Yep. It's like I was there though.
Exactly. And if you have, for those of you that have children, I'm a mom of 3. Nikki is also a mom. They may use the children, making the victim feel guilty about the children, using the children to relay messages. That's a huge one. They will use the children to relay messages. The abuser will, if the abuser cannot talk to you and you're trying to go no contact, which is usually recommended in abusive relationships, but some people use the gray rock method as well. They will try to use the kids to relay messages, using visitation to harass the victim, or threatening to take the children away or to call social services.
Yep. I just feel like you're going through a list of my life right now.
I was just about to say, many of these are things that I'm pretty sure most of our audience, when they catch the replay of the live and on the recording, or even on when they catch it on the podcast, will be sitting there shaking their head saying, yes, check mark, check mark. You know, these are all things that I've experienced because I'm doing that as well, like check mark, especially with the financial abuse. That example that I gave, you know, you can be working and still be financial abuse. You know, that was myself. So these are all examples of things that you may be experiencing. And it's good to go over these things because, like I said, some people, even the intimidation piece and the emotional abuse piece and the financial abuse piece, people don't know or don't understand that these things are domestic violence. So that's why it's so important to get that education and that information out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And of course, using the kids is a huge one. And then finally, the last final thing is treating the victim like a servant, making all the big decisions and acting like the master of the castle, treating the victim as more or less as a servant. So these are just some examples of things that you may be experiencing with abuse. And then also, finally, wanted to touch on trauma, because trauma, you may be experiencing PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and trauma as a result of the abuse. Trauma is a response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope. It can cause feelings of helplessness and diminishes the victim's sense of self and their ability to feel the full range of emotions and experiences. Statistically, 1 out of 2 women will experience at least one traumatic event in their lifetime, and statistically, 1 out of 10 women will develop long-term PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other mental illnesses due to a lack of support regimen at the onset of some of the traumatic symptoms. And then there's different types of trauma. Complex trauma results from exposure to multiple traumatic events, and chronic trauma results from repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. Examples include domestic violence and child abuse.
Absolutely. And just from someone who suffers from PTSD, it's not because an interesting thing. So when my ex called CPS on me, and the CPS worker came to speak to me, and we were talking, and I was explaining to her that I had PTSD. She was like, oh, well, she was like, I don't want to upset you. It probably just upsets you talking about him. And I'm like, no, it's not like that. I said, it's when he starts yelling at me. If he raises his voice at me, it triggers my flight or fright response. And I freeze, and I can't, like, it's so, I said, having a conversation with him when he starts raising his voice like that, I can't do it. And I'm supposed to be talking to him about my kid. I was like, that's what upsets me. I was like, I can talk about him. I'm a domestic violence advocate. I speak about him all the time. That's not what triggers it at all. So I feel like there's like this how society views it. You know, they're like, oh, you're this fragile woman who, it's like, no, it's only certain things. But the reason why I have those responses is because that person used to abuse me. So you know what I mean? It's just kind of, I hate that they try to put labels or try to perceive it, you know, into something. Like I'm not going to be ashamed because I suffer from PTSD. I didn't beat myself up, you know. So it's just, I don't know. It was just a weird situation. And then when, you know, she was like, "Well, why do you think he is calling?" And I said, "Because I'm a domestic violence advocate and I speak about what happened to me and he's pissed off about it." I said, "But just because he calls CPS on me, that's not going to stop me from speaking out about it. It's not going to shut me up. Because obviously, if CPS thought they had a case, they would have took my kids."
Absolutely. It's called a narcissistic injury for those of you who are just joining us. And what that means is when you do things like speak out and let people know about the abuse, that will enrage the narcissist and they will generally retaliate, and they will retaliate sometimes in different ways. One way is, in that specific case, is calling child protective services. Another way maybe to slander your name to other people and tell lies about things that never happened. Another way maybe to make up lies and go to the courts and try to get you legally in trouble with lies. There's various ways that they will retaliate, but they will retaliate against you speaking out about their abuse. And they also will retaliate if you have ended, a lot of times if you've ended the relationship, or you've anything that they feel is a slight to them or a narcissist that causes a narcissistic injury. So thank you for touching on that. And then you also touched on the fight or flight response, which, you know, being a victim of domestic violence, your body is constantly in that flight or flight mode, and which is not good, and you know, it wreaks havoc on your body being in that stressful mode a lot. And a lot of times when that's all you know, those red flags and butterflies seem the same to you. So when you start off that relationship, you're like, "Oh, he's exciting, it's intense," and it's those are red flags that you're ignoring because you're thinking that you're having butterflies and that this is you know, this intense you know, you're in the middle of love bombing, wonderful relationship, but it's because there's all red flags. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times what happens is those healthy and normal relationships seem very boring to you and they're not as intense to you, and you're not understanding those relationships and what to do in those relationships because they're not filled with that toxicness that and that abusiveness that you've become used to and accustomed to. So you're not sure what to do because it's a normal relationship and it's calm and it's loving and it's calm and it's kind, and it's not filled with you know, these
Malicious.
ups and downs and dramatic ups and downs and toxicity and abuse. And so, and it doesn't require you to make you know, for you to do all the giving and giving, you know, and you to make all the sacrifices. So it's confusing to you, especially if you've just gotten out of the, you know, you've been out of an abusive relationship, you're getting into a healthy one. That can be something that you're experiencing as well. And that's where therapy comes in. And that's why it's really important to make sure that you are, you know, doing the therapy.
Absolutely.
And then getting back to, wow, I feel like we really covered a lot tonight.
I know we have. I was going to say, I feel like this was a really good session.
Yes, definitely. Thank you again for those that you that are still watching and hanging in with us. And again, you know, please make sure that you are checking out Narcissistic Domestic Violence Healing and Support Incorporated, NDV Healing and Support. So before we end, I do want to also get to back to the book. So it is, again, My Secret Life, My Journey Through Domestic Violence. And I am going to read you just a little teeny, you can purchase it for $20. I'm going to just read you just a little teeny, like give you a little teaser. Obviously I'm not gonna, it's a teaser so that you get to figure out what happens, some other tips I give you in there, about dealing, I do give some learning tips in there because obviously, I am an advocate. So I do give some, and a coach. So I give some educational pieces in there, but I also tell a little bit of my story in there too. So to get the rest of my story and those educational pieces, please make sure you do buy the book. So like I said, I'm going to read you a little excerpt from it. It's, okay, so here it is. Emerging from the troubled waters. It's the things that you least expect that hit you the hardest. Thwack. A searing, sharp punch to my eye startles me and jolts me completely out of my seat. That statement has now taken on a different, more literal meaning. My eye is stinging, bleeding, and my glasses are completely shattered and on the ground. I'm completely blindsided. There's a pressing and pulsating pain in my face and in my eye. What the hell is happening? He's screaming at me as he attempts to grab the car keys and my cell phone. Where's your phone? He screams. My vision is blurred. I have no clue where my phone is at this point. It's temporarily lost due to the chaos. And to be honest, I don't care where my phone is. I'm angry, confused, hurt, and now in pain. His screaming burns in my mind. I have just been punched in the face by my boyfriend, blindsided by the man who said he loved me, promised a life and kids with me, and promised I was safe with him. I was picking up my purse, not paying attention when he blindsided me and punched me. Unbelievably, he punched me when I wasn't even looking. Okay, so you'll have to, of course, read the rest of the book to figure out what happens, and of course, some educational pieces that I give in the book. So that about wraps up our Domestic Violence 101 and Narcissist Abuse 101 for the live Wednesday today. Please make sure that you join us next Wednesday, the 20th, same time, same place on the Narcissistic Domestic Violence Healing and Support Facebook page. We will be going live. It will be live next time because we're going to be fixing the technical difficulties. And of course, as always, it will be on our podcast. Our podcast also will be having additional episodes. We'll be talking about additional survivor story episodes and some stories that have been in the headlines. So be sure to make sure you're looking out for those as well. And of course, be sure to make sure that you look out for our second annual virtual Speak Out, Silence Hides Violence. That will also be on the Narcissistic Abuse Facebook page, and you can catch the replay, or you can also catch it also on the podcast. And then last but not least, make sure that you go out and buy the My Secret Life, My Journey Through Domestic Violence book for $20. Also, you can donate to NDV Healing and Support Incorporated, and you can also be a sponsor on our podcast, where we will play your ads on our podcast, as well as a sponsor to any of our events, and we will have your brand and your logo on there as well. And you can go to NDV Healing Support inc.org for more information on how to do that. Once again, we want to thank the lovely Nikki Davis for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
An advocate, as a domestic violence advocate as well, board member to NDV Healing and Support Incorporated, and founder of Survivor Overcoming Abusive Partners. And again, for those of you joining us, I am Theresa Simon, executive director and founder of NDV Healing and Support Incorporated, podcast host, and of course, domestic violence and narcissist abuse advocate and empowerment coach and narcissist abuse recovery assistant. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Nikki. And we will be back again with more information for you. And you feel free to email us your thoughts, questions, concerns, if you want more information about our weekly support group, Saturdays, the virtual domestic violence support group. We are here for you so that you can come in and receive all the assistance you need. Be sure to, let us know if you message us about that, if you want to be a part of the support group. It's always growing, and we love to have you as a member. And just thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely night. And be sure to join us again on the podcast as well. Thank you, everyone.